Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Yeah, we're in Mexico City. This is the global tour of the global insurrection against banker occupation. Mexico City is a hot spot. Stacy.
Max. So, of course, the biggest story here in terms of the rest of the world is that Mexico is a failed state. In fact, when you and I were saying we were coming here, everybody universally told us, oh my God, get kidnap insurance, there are gang wars, you're going to be beheaded. We did get kidnap insurance for $1,000, so I don't think that's going to cover
I think
much.
we overpaid for the kidnap insurance.
So it's not worth kidnapping us. But we arrived here, and it's not a failed state. I mean, that's quite obvious as soon as you arrive at the airport and drive into the city, because it's clearly a country with advanced infrastructure and facilities, and it's much nicer than I would have expected. It's nicer than driving into New York City, for example.
Well, look, Stacy, wherever we go, whether it's in Hong Kong, Mexico City, Athens, around the world, it's the same story. There's a lot of perception that things are on fire, things are burning down, things are in chaos. But when you get there, there are enclaves. There are parts of the city that are in tremendous stress. There's other parts of the city that are just getting on with it. And I think it's important to keep this in mind, that these situations are salvageable. I mean, they all suffer from the same problem, in my view. It's the global insurrection against banker occupation. They all suffer from Banksterism. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Mexico is no different in this regard. It's a slightly different flavor of Banksterism, but it's still Banksterism, hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into this aspect of the drug war, the Banksterism that used to be, you know, it's some parts of Mexico are like America in the 1920s when we had Prohibition and the likes of Chicago and Al Capone ruled America, and there was a lot of corruption in the mayors and governors' offices across states across the United States until Prohibition ended, and of course that evaporated. But in terms of it being a failed state, I want to turn to a quote from our friend John Ackerman, who we've interviewed here, and he was interviewed in the Politico. Quote, "First, Mexico is not a failed state. To the contrary, it stands out as one of Latin American countries with the most powerful and best funded public institutions. The country has significantly strengthened its Congress, judiciary, state governments, and a series of specialized independent agencies in recent years. Mexico is also the 14th largest economy in the world and a member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD."
Right. Well, I mean, in our lifetime, certainly the NAFTA, the trade accord under the Clinton administration, was a huge game changer for not only industry being able to come to Mexico, but also it sparked a tremendous amount of guns flowing south into Mexico, along with drugs flowing north into the U.S. So these trade deals were put into place, but not a lot of care was put into implementation of these trade deals. And this is important because now they've got another global trade deal with TTIP. You know, this is another way to bring together countries around the world into a massive trade deal. It's going to be implemented with any more care. Yeah. Clearly, in the NAFTA situation, it was implemented as shambolic, and it ended up with some winners, some losers, but it didn't have to be the way it shook out, the way it did.
From our experience here, our conversations with locals, they seem to think NAFTA is better than what most Americans will think. Of course, Americans lost a lot of high-paying industrial jobs, so they don't see it as so good for them. But in terms of deals, there is also, you know, everybody knows about the story about the 43 missing students that were, they call it the Ayotzinapa. I know everybody in the control room will be laughing at my pronunciation of that.
That sounds good to me, but I'm not a good judge.
Ayotzinapa series, the United States has been implicated in Mexico's security crisis. The Merida Initiative, a partnership between the United States and Mexican governments aimed at fighting organized crime, implemented in 2007, directly implicates the United States in the issue. Despite this initiative, which claims to work to further respect for human rights and the rule of law, more than 60,000 people have been killed in Mexico from 2006 to 2012, according to Human Rights Watch. So just in 2008 alone, for example, the U.S. Congress allocated $3 billion to this Merida initiative, and many are citing this as a cause for so much of the violence that has erupted since then, 2007, when we've had these tens of thousands of people dying, just like in the days of Chicago, when there was bloody warfare all over the place and all sorts of gun warfare there.
What do we mean by Banksterism? Okay, when you mention tens of thousands died, here in Mexico, due to the drug trafficking, all fingers point to HSBC. Now, we typically do our show in London, where the global banking center is located. In terms of the global banking center that is responsible for the global money laundering of tens of billions of drug money is HSBC. And here in Mexico, you see the result of what happens when there's no law applied to a major global bank. If they do not need to adhere to any law, you end up with lawlessness on the ground. Now, here in Mexico, we see the result in these communities where it's become completely lawless. Why? Because HSBC is allowed to run rampant.
But a lot of people are saying that the drug war should just end completely, and therefore, you know, the likes of HSBC and Wachovia before it, of course, Wachovia settled, they admitted to laundering $378 billion in Mexican drug cartel money. That dwarfs anything that HSBC has done. They've only admitted to like something $7 to $8 billion.
Right. Then Wells Fargo took them over, and then who's the biggest investor in Wells Fargo? Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett.
Has he said anything? Does he go on CNBC talking about his role in the thousands of deaths?
But the problem is markets are driven by supply and demand. In the United States alone, there's $100 billion per year market in terms of drug use. They consume $100 billion of heroin, meth, marijuana, and cocaine. And to put that into context of the Mexican economy, it's a $1.3 trillion economy. So naturally, that's 10% of the Mexican economy just goes up the nose of Americans. Of course, 80% of exports from Mexico go to America. I don't know if that counts drug use. But of course, you know, $1.3 trillion economy, I don't know if that counts all of this drug exports, because in Europe now, they're now including drugs in GDP growth.
Right. The GDP, for example, in Britain now includes prostitution and drug use.
That's why they've surpassed France for the first time.
Right. So their economy is growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, this incredible move of drugs up north, and the result being these enormous waves of ultra violence that we see as a result, it is really, as you point out, when you say America is benefiting, of course, within America, you'd have to include the CIA. The CIA is part of America, and all these revelations about the CIA, the FBI, all the drug running, the fast and furious drug running. Yeah. You know, what about maybe shutting down the CIA? Maybe Mexico should just say to the CIA, get out of here.
But beyond that, okay, we all know about that. We've covered that. But the fact is, I'm talking about the economy of Mexico, and it's suffering because of this perception of the country as a failed state. Everybody acted like we were coming to Somalia or Libya or Afghanistan, all other places where the U.S. has also destroyed the economy and created failed states. But here, it's very different from arriving in places like Libya or Afghanistan. And I want to also talk about another big story here in the last few minutes here, and that is, of course, the peso and oil and the new oil laws coming in to Mexico this year at a very bad time, as it would happen. Mexico's peso feels heat from falling oil prices. Peso falls to weakest level against U.S. dollar in more than 2 years on decline in world oil prices. So I didn't realize this, but according to the Wall Street Journal, as the most traded of the emerging market currencies, the peso is often used by investors to hedge emerging market exposure and sold off in times of global financial turmoil. Already under pressure, along with other emerging market currencies, on prospects of higher U.S. interest rates, the Mexican currency lost further ground after the OPEC decided against cutting crude oil output to address falling prices. So now we have oil at below $50, the WTI price anyway. And right now, Mexico has opened up. They reformed their oil laws. It's always been nationalized since independence. And here we have the invitation for all oil investors to come in, but oil investors across America and Europe are being wiped out right now at the moment.
Right, the timing couldn't be worse.
Yeah.
So in other words, oil prices crashed. Yeah. Cantarell, which is one of the 3 biggest oil fields in the world here in Mexico, is in rapid depletion. Yeah. And this is one reason why the economy is turning more and more to the kleptocracy, the kleptocrats and the narco state, is that the Cantarell oil fields are really drying up. There's no real push to diversify in any big way. And as a result,
they are. Actually, they've introduced a lot of reform laws, so they are trying to diversify, but it comes at a vulnerable time, a difficult time. It used to be a huge percentage of government revenue here was from oil taxes. Now it's less than a third. So we'll move on to that bit because the Wall Street Journal says lower oil prices affect Mexico's fiscal account, since oil and related taxes account for around a third of federal government revenue. The government, which has budgeted for $79 a barrel in 2015, has hedged around 60% of next year's planned crude exports at $76.40 a barrel, and has money in a stabilization fund to cover further shortfalls, which it should be able to avoid budget cuts. They also have $193 billion in foreign reserves, which is one of the largest ever they've ever had.
Right. Well, that's something these emerging economies have learned over the past 20 years, is that you need a big safety reserve in currency for when those times when you have blow-ups in the global financial markets due to over-leverage in these money center areas like New York, like London. So there is a big reserve account to cushion the blow. But the dollar, remember, the dollar is on really a tear on the upside.
Yeah.
And so all currencies against the dollar are falling. And of course, with oil also down, it's a double whammy for a country like this. So where do we go forward from here? Certainly a diversified economy would be great, but there's so much gridlock associated with economies that are reliant on oil. We see this in Russia, we see this in other oil exporting countries, because when the price is high, they get very lazy, not to put too fine a point on it. And when the price is low, there's a bit of a panic mode that's set in. So there's never a good time to diversify. Well, the time right now might be good to diversify.
Yeah, but again, we're heading into, it looks like a storm. We've covered this, that it looks a lot like 2008. The U.S. dollar is on a tear. As you said, it's higher than it was in 2008 when the global financial system was crumbling. It looked like Armageddon. Oil prices have also fallen by as steep a decline as in 2008. Bond yields are even lower than they were at that time. So all the markets, except for the U.S. equity markets, are signaling utter catastrophe coming. So I don't know where the spark could come in terms of a peso crisis, a ruble crisis, a yen crisis. It could be any crisis, because as we're tumbling so fast, of course, this has a knock-on effect on all the derivatives markets around the world.
Well, the takeaway, though, is come on down to Mexico City. It's fantastic. We're having a great time, and the people there have been very, very nice to us. And so anyway, thanks.
And I want to thank TV Azteca, of course, for this wonderful studio we're recording right here in Mexico City.
Fantastic. All right, well, stay tuned for the second half, and I'll mangle some more language here. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Guillermo Barba. He is a journalist who blogs for Forbes Mexico, provides gold and silver market analysis for Channel 40 TV here in Mexico. Guillermo, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Welcome to Mexico, Max.
We're having a great time.
Oh, that's good.
I want to get into a hot story right at the top here. Bank of Mexico, they were the first to start the repatriation ball rolling, even before in Germany. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, yes, in fact, that's because in 2011 and 2012, Bank of Mexico bought 120 tons of gold. That was a big story at the moment. And I asked the Bank of Mexico, oh, well, tell me where the gold is. Because you bought, okay, that's fine. You bought 120 tons of gold, that's fine. But where is it? Where are the gold reserves? And they didn't want to reveal this, and then we wrangled for 4 months, and finally they said, well, we are right. We'll tell you the truth. The Mexican gold reserves are at the Bank of England.
What?
At the Bank of England.
What kind of outrageousness is this?
Yes.
Where the Bank of Mexico has their gold in the Bank of England, the most corrupt central bank in the world?
Yeah, and that's not all, because the Bank of Mexico has an unallocated account, meaning that we don't have possession of a specific gold bars.
Unallocated in the bank. You might as well throw it away. Bank of Mexico, they need to put down the tequila. Exactly. They need to repatriate their gold. They need allocated gold because this country deserves
at least
wealth.
first allocated gold, and then to repatriate most of it, because 98% of the gold reserves are supposedly held at the Bank of England, Max, and that cannot be. That cannot be, because the time will come when a huge crisis a worse crisis than the crisis we had in 2008, 2009 will come. And when that happens, believe me, all countries will need to have and will want to have their gold reserves as close to them as possible. That's why it's very important to do like the Netherlands, to repatriate most of the gold reserves.
Okay, we're going to talk more about gold. I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. So you're an economist.
Yeah.
So what's the biggest economic story in Mexico today, Guillermo?
Well, I think that the peso devaluation and the collapse of the price of oil, Stacy said some minutes ago that for the current year, the oil sales of Mexican oil sales are hedged. But I think that we will have problems because almost more than 30% of government revenue comes from oil. So next year and 2016 and 17 we'll have problems because we have a large government spending, and they will have to cut government spending or to borrow money, because at the moment Mexican government is in the red. They're in deficit, where they're spending too much. They're having a high rate of inflation.
Now, let me jump in there for a second, because you said the government's going to have to cut government spending. Okay, because
of course they will borrow money. And
that's my question. In other words, these governments around the world, they're facing a similar problem in that the global shadow banking system is collapsing, and it's bleeding into the real economy. And countries have to decide: do they pursue austerity, that is to say, cut spending, or do they print like drunken sailors on weekend leave, like they do in America under the auspices of Paul Krugman and others? So where's it going to break here in Mexico? Are they going to go down the path of cutting spending and bring in austerity, or your thoughts?
They should, but of course they will never do it, because the Keynesian thinking of government is very clear. They think that by spending money, they are stimulating the economy, and they say, well, we have to spend money. It doesn't matter if what we spend money on, but we have to spend a lot of money, and if we don't have enough money, well, just borrow money. That's why one of the reasons why the Mexican public debt is growing and growing and growing since Peña Nieto took office. So we have to worry, because we are not in a good shape, in a good financial shape. The collapse of oil prices are collapsing, and they may remain low for a long time. And that's another symptom, by the way, of deflation in the world. So the government will have a lot of trouble, and Mexicans will suffer, because, of course, if the price of oil remains low, that means that the government needs to borrow money and to raise taxes, and in order to have enough money to spend more and to keep. Okay,
let's talk about this. You're in a vicious downward cycle.
Of course.
A doom loop.
Yes.
If I may use this phrase without being overly dramatic. But it's tied in a lot of ways to the U.S. dollar, because oil is priced in dollars. Mexico, 80% of exports go to the U.S.
Yes, correct.
You get NAFTA opened up, and it's like Mexico is the 51st state of America, practically. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's it's a vassal state of America, some would say. So other countries faced in a similar predicament are trying to get out of the dollar. You've got Russia, China, Iran.
Mexico is not one of them, of course. Mexico is not one of them.
Not one of them.
Right now, Mexico is happy with the dollar, of course.
But my point is, maybe they should start thinking about getting out of this dollar chokehold. What do you think?
Yes, of course. That's one of the reasons we have to expand our gold reserves, because we have almost $200 billion in dollars in gold reserves, in forex reserves, but only less than 4% are in gold, and we have all our eggs in only on a basket. Because Mexican government is betting on it.
I get it. Let's talk about kind of looking back now historically a little bit. During the period of the past 10 or 15 years, since 2000, the middle class in Asia, you've expanded sevenfold. In Latin America, twofold. What's that all about?
Well, the reason is that they are becoming capitalists in Asia. They are being more capitalist than the Western world, because in Mexico we are not being capitalists. In general, in Latin America, we're all developing countries, and if we don't change this, we're almost all countries are with certain nuances where all these Latin American countries are socialists, not capitalists. We need Mexico to become a capitalist country like China is doing, because many people say, oh, you know, China is a communist country. Oh, come on.
Well, other countries in Latin America, though, have gone more left. You know, they've nationalized institutions and industries, and their economies seem to be healthier. Would you agree with that, or am I being completely off base?
Well, I disagree.
Okay.
Okay. In fact, what we need is more free markets. The free market works, and to have more private property, because you know private property is the cornerstone of capitalism, and capitalism is the cornerstone of the real development. You know, the Western world developed because of capitalism, and that's why now the eastern part of the world is developing, because they are being more capitalist than the Western world, Max. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why gold is flowing from the West to the East, to the Far East, especially to China. That's why China is going to become the power of this century.
Yeah, let me take another stab at this and see if I get this any better. So in the case of China, of course, they're making huge investments in Latin America. Are they making big investments in Mexico?
Yes, of course.
So where is that showing up? In what industries? In energy and elsewhere? Where do you see the Chinese influence in Mexico right now?
Mainly in manufacturing area and in developing, for example, in the railway industry. By the way, the government canceled a contract that Chinese had been granted to build a high-speed railway from Mexico City to Querétaro. And that's why the investments are flowing. At the moment, investments in the energy sector are not coming because of the collapse of oil. That will not happen. Even if Mexico had structural reforms last year, especially in the energy sector, that will not be enough to develop the country or to provide more economic growth or for job creation. That will not work, because that's not enough. That's not a good time for the energy sector. Or the energy sector was closed for 75 years. And that's good that we are finally opened.
Right, they just opened the energy sector.
Yes, but maybe not at the right time.
Yeah, the timing
maybe yes.
Was pretty
that's
bad.
Not enough.
All right, let me change gears for a second. Let's move on to tourism for a moment here. So tourism is about 7% of the $1.3 trillion Mexican economy. Acapulco just experienced its worst tourist season on record, and it seems like all the headlines about drug war and corruption and violence is taking a big dent in tourism.
One of the reasons Acapulco failed to attract more tourism last season, because there is a perception, as Stacy said, that Mexico is a failed state. Yes, in my opinion, either you have a state or you have a failed state. In the middle, not so failed state, not such a thing. But so in this terms, from my perspective, yes, Mexico is a failed state, because there's not an effective rule of law. There's a lot of corruption.
That's a bold statement you're saying. You're saying if in a binary situation, either failed or not failed, you're saying Mexico is a failed state.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, we are not Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean that that's not good news for us. We need to become we need a strong state, an effective rule of law, in order to develop our country.
Well, you're not going to get any help from the U.S. because they don't know how to run a safe state either. So finally, we've got about a minute, maybe a minute left. We're going to get back to gold here for a moment. You're a gold bug, and what is the Mexican attitude toward gold in general? Do they see it as a store of wealth, or are they totally been caught up in the cult of paper money? They drank the Kool-Aid of paper money. They're cultists. Well,
this is curious, but Mexican public prefer silver, and that's good news. Mexican people do not love gold as, for example, the Indians, people from India, but we love silver, and that's good news. We should monetize the Libertad silver ounce. There is a proposal for that. Of course, Bank of Mexico opposes this proposal, but that's something we should do. But in the meantime, we can buy Libertad silver ounces to protect. Yes, we have to protect the purchasing power, because the peso is devaluating and things are going from bad to worse in Mexico. So we have to prepare for the next crisis. We are setting the next crisis, Max, and it's not going to be good for the purchasing power of the people. We need more silver.
All right, Guillermo Barba, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max, and welcome to Mexico.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Guillermo Barba. If you'd like to send us a tweet us, Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.